All right, hello and welcome back to Making the Argument. We have a very special guest with us today, and that's not just a pun there. This guy actually served in special forces. In fact, we were in the same the same regiment, you could say. We were in different groups with the same regiment. But with us today is Congressman Mike Waltz. And not only does Mike have a very distinguished career with respect to serving in the military and specifically special forces, colloquially known as Green Berets, but he's also been a very distinguished member of Congress. I don't say that about a lot of members of Congress.
No, you don't.
No, I do not. No, I do not. But the reason why we're having Mike on today is because not only is the congressman serving on several very, very important committees, especially when you look at the things going on in the world right now, and not only has he been a very, very outspoken voice in favor of trying to save our military from, I would say, the demasculinization that's taking part of it, and certainly the wokeification that's attempting to take part within our military. But he's also, finally, we have somebody as the first Green Beret elected to Congress. We have a Green Beret writing a book so they don't all go to the Navy SEALs. And I'm very grateful for that. We didn't need another coloring book. We just didn't.
Yeah, right.
I'm just teasing. We all love our Navy SEAL brothers. But Congressman Waltz, thank you very much for being on.
Hey, Nick, great to be with you, man. And look, it's one thing to deal with the battlefield. It's another thing to deal with the ideological battlefield that we're dealing right now. And one of the things I talk about in the book and kind of the attributes of what you need to think and lead like a Green Beret and how we're different than our brothers and sisters in the other special operations. I tell you, if we can build coalitions of tribes, of elders, of warlords, even in Africa and Afghanistan, then we can have what it takes to be successful in politics. But there are some days I think the tribes of the swamp outmatch the tribes of Afghanistan. So it's a fight for sure.
No, I whenever I've had people ask me, what best prepared you for serving in elected office, I always say, well, my previous job was unconventional warfare and counter-insurgency, and it's amazing how much that prepares you for domestic politics. But you bring up a good point, right? Because there's a lot of different units within that blanket, that umbrella term of special operations, right? Within special operations, you have Rangers and you have SEALs and you have Delta and you have JTACs, you have Green Berets, you have special forces. And the media tends to conflate all these things or treat them like we're all just, a different series of commando forces and whatnot. But there is something very unique about special forces and the work we do. And I'm really glad someone wrote a book on this, because I've read like the West Point way of leadership. I've read other books on this way of leadership and that way of leadership. And there really hasn't been one that I've seen that has been written on this specific topic. So can you go into a little bit of detail on what makes the special forces or the Green Beret style of leadership very different, not only from our special operations counterparts, but just from maybe corporate leadership or other forms of leadership, and why you think it's specifically relevant right now?
Well, I get asked in high school groups and all kinds of forums, even think tanks up in Washington D.C. What's the difference in the Green Berets, the SEALs, the Rangers? How do they operate differently? How are they organized differently? How do they think differently? A lot of our veterans out there listening may know, but a lot of the American people, 99%. Don't serve at all. In the modern day all volunteer military, don't know. And I think the easiest way to describe it is the Osama bin Laden raid, right? That was SEAL Team 6, other side of the world, difficult situation, middle of the night. And they go in, they put 2 bullets on the forehead, and they get out and go back to base. And they were supported by obviously the Rangers, Special Operations Aviation. The Rangers do that, and I think to a much larger scale and battalion-sized elements. They need to take down an airfield in a hostile territory. That's what they do. Green Beret's very different. Operate in smaller teams, sometimes as small as 3 or 4, embedded with and by, with, and through that local village, that militia, that partnered military, specializing in guerrilla warfare, insurgency, and counterinsurgency. And as you know, we have to learn multiple languages, local cultures, specialize in regions of the world. Each one of our groups specialize in a part of the world. and you take a handful of us, and we'll train thousands of them to take care of our enemy's business for us. So I think the quicker way to say it is the SEALs and Rangers find our enemies and take care of business. Green Berets like to find our friends and work ourselves out of a job by training them and advising them and assisting them to take care of business for us.
No, and I think, and again, I think that's especially relevant not only when we look at, kind of the idea of being able to find unique coalitions or build unique coalitions toward common goals, even if there's significant cultural differences, significant maybe religious differences or political differences. It is about finding that common objective and being able to get people moving in the same direction, while at the same time respecting that those other differences they're not going away. They're not necessarily changing overnight. But I also think it's really important for how we look at foreign policy, because obviously for probably a significant portion of American history, especially within the 20th century, it was this idea of the Cold War. It was peer-to-peer nations, fighting in very, very large conventional conflicts or even potentially nuclear conflicts. And Iraq and Afghanistan, and look, I think there's plenty of room to critique U.S. foreign policy when it comes to some of this stuff, but there's no doubt that when you look at the opening days of Afghanistan, a relatively small contingent of Green Berets with other guys from CIA and Ground Branch and whatnot were able to pull off something that nobody thought was possible, and then we quickly turned it into this massive conventional nation building exercise, and that's really become part of the question. Do you see, from a foreign policy perspective, because you serve on a lot of the relevant committees for this, do you see that sort of unconventional warfare, counterinsurgency, foreign internal defense working by, through, and with allies to deal with problems that are both problems for our allies, but also problems for the United States, without committing tens of thousands of U.S. troops and trillions of dollars? Do you see that as kind of a more effective way to engage in a lot of the foreign adventures we seem to always find ourselves in?
Yeah, I do, and for a number of reasons. I mean, one, we still have to be prepared to deter, hopefully, but even engage in large conventional warfare, right? Especially with the Chinese Communist Party, whose navy is now larger than ours, space force is larger than ours, is tripling the size of their nuclear arsenal, has about a 50-1 advantage in terms of cyber warriors that they're engaging. We have to be prepared for that. But the whole rest of the world, in a lot of other conflicts, I think we can get that great return on investment for a few highly trained operators that use unconventional approaches to maintain American leadership, conduct our foreign policy on the ground, align our allies, and case in point, you just raised in Afghanistan. I mean, it was less than 50 Americans on the ground, 4 ODAs in the very initial days, partnered with militias aligned with us and against the Taliban and Al Qaeda, that completely liberated that country. Of course, with the backing of the United States Air Force putting bombs on foreheads. And then we just absolutely mushroomed and ballooned that in a way that bogged us down there for many, many years. Colombia, another case in point. A few hundred Green Berets partnered with the Colombian government, defeated the FARC insurgency. So now it's the opposite; it's counterinsurgency rather than insurgency and guerrilla warfare, with tremendous effect. I mean, Colombia could have devolved in a completely total narco state. And I think we need to apply a lot of those lessons when it comes to the Mexican government now, as it deals with paramilitary cartels that are literally fighting the Mexican army, not police force, to a standstill, with heavy weapons, with billions of dollars at their disposal, in partnership with the Chinese as they kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. But again, it's that return on investment with a few special operators partnered with locals, taking unconventional approaches that I think could have strategic effects as we deal with a national debt that is now exceeding our entire defense budget. We can't just keep throwing billions of dollars at every single conflict. We have the case in Syria. It was actually, and I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about Ukraine, but I think Ukraine would have been completely overrun if it were not for the Green Berets that were teaching them how to use the Javelin missiles that Donald Trump was the one to provide. Obama refused to give them any lethal aid. It was a few Green Berets on the ground and the lethal aid that Trump provided. And now that effort has completely ballooned to the tune of billions and an unlimited blank check. So I do think we can get a lot done and should get a lot done with just a few very light footprint on the ground, partnered with smart economic policy, diplomatic policy, and of course those other enablers.
Well, this is one thing I've really appreciated about Trump's approach to foreign policy, about your approach to foreign policy, is that it's not this idea that the United States needs to completely disappear from the rest of the world and pretty much just shut everything.
Yeah.
There still needs to be a presence there for a variety of reasons that are important to the United States, right? America first is not let's just ignore everything. It's like no. Let's prioritize what's important to ourselves, our citizens. And then, yeah, there will be times where the military has to be deployed, but you guys have always seemed to understand the difference between a punitive expedition toward a very specific enemy versus we're going to invade and spend thousands of lives and trillions of dollars in order to try to recreate a foreign country in our own image. And that just doesn't seem to work out very well in most cases. So I think that's important. But I noticed another thing. So like in your book, the first, the title there is Hard Truths. So what do you think are the hard truths that you want to emphasize when it comes to political leadership, military leadership, or just leadership in general? What are the hard truths that you kind of associate with this idea of how to think and lead like a Green Beret?
Yeah, and I'll jump on that in just a second, but I just want to foot stomp kind of this what we can get done with just a little. In my one of my tours, and I write about this in the book. It was literally three of us: me, a medic, and a communications sergeant, embedded with an Arab task force of Jordanians and Emiratis from the UAE, partnered with 180 Afghans. So it was three of us, 90 Arabs, 180 Afghans. It was the closest I'll get to Lawrence of Arabia ever. And if I never eat goat again, then I'll be fine, because we were completely out there, living off the land. And whatever I could influence that Arab and Afghan task force commander to do, we did. Again, with just three of us. So in that sense, like, we would go into these villages and valleys, and I was turbaned up and bearded up and would just try to blend into the background as the Arab officer stood before all of these elders and said, "Look what the United States did for Germany after they won World War II. Look what they did for Japan. They helped them rebuild, even though they were their enemies that had attacked them. That's what they're trying to do here." And take it a step further, he would say, "Look at Dubai, look at Jakarta, look at Istanbul, these great Muslim cities. We can move forward in the 21st century. We don't have to be stuck back in the Stone Age like Osama bin Laden and the Taliban are telling you. We can be proper Muslims and have a brighter future for our children." Man, it would turn whole tribes and valleys. Just that strategic messaging, with us in the background. I'm providing the intelligence and air support and medevac support and all, but they're out there doing the messaging, the supporting. I would take that message over a division of U.S. troops that would just be fed into a grinder of IEDs and ambushes. And so that kind of mindset and approach is something I think we need to do a hell of a lot more of. And then, how do you apply that to politics? Well, as conservatives, we don't message as well as we should. The other side just throws around the word free. And that's pretty tough to combat. But when you dig in what has worked in terms of individual responsibility, individual opportunity, equal opportunity for all, the right of a parent to decide their kid's education, the right of a dad to defend himself through our second constitutional amendment, we've got to message that with credibility, and that strategic messaging, as I think, will turn way more than necessarily having boots on the ground. And in terms, look, of the hard truths, each one of the chapters has an attribute of what I learned in combat, what I learned in Ranger School, what I learned in SEER School that not every American is going to go through, nor should they. But I want to share with kind of how that applies to our everyday lives. And one of the chapters, believe it or not, the first one is restraint. And I talk about how we were under mortar fire. One of my snipers picks up a 10-year-old little boy. Every time that little boy put a cell phone to his ear, another round came in. And sure enough, he's asking for permission to take the kid out. He was on a 50 cal Barrett. I mean, it would have split this 10-year-old kid in half. Seconds are going by. I'm thinking about my own kids. I denied him permission, man. And there might be a lot of people listening and watching saying, what the hell? I told him fire a warning shot. He did. Thank God. The little boy runs into his village. We follow him in. The Taliban had been there that morning, lined up all the families and said, give your oldest son to go fight the Americans or else. One family refused. They hung their 7-year-old little boy. That'll always stick with me. But those are the kinds of decisions that we're having to make day in and day out. Was that the right decision? I think so in the time, restraint. If I were explaining this to the parents of one of my Green Berets that I'd lost because of that 10-year-old spotter, I don't know. But I go through and I talk about in history, who has shown restraint in the right way. Grant showed restraint to Lee, and I think prevented guerrilla warfare for years in the South. H.W. Bush Sr., showed restraint. All the generals were telling him in the first Gulf War, don't stop in Kuwait, go all the way to Baghdad and take Saddam Hussein out. He said, no, we're going to show restraint and stop in Kuwait. We saw, I think, the folly of that when his son went all the way to Baghdad, and we got bogged down there for years. And then you take it to President Trump, right? With Iran, they attacked international shipping. He didn't hit back. They attacked Saudi oil. He didn't hit back. They shot down one of our drones. It wasn't until they stormed our embassy and killed an American that he said, all right, gloves off, and took out Soleimani, restored peace, punched the bully in the mouth, escalated to de-escalate, and then we have peace deals being signed on the White House lawn. So, it's that restraint, but then that targeted application strategically of force. And it takes real judgment to know when to do that and when not to. All too often, we just want to throw divisions and billions of dollars at the problem.
That's a good point. But what's also a good point is that if you want to look your best as a dude, you need to go over to True Classic. And I know what I'm talking about here because a couple of years ago, my wife bought me a bunch of t-shirts. I was like, why are you buying me these random t-shirts from this random company I haven't heard of? And then I put one on. I was like, oh, I kind of like this. But more importantly, she liked it. And like I've always said, gentlemen, if she likes you putting on those clothes, she probably likes taking them off you. And that is exactly what True Classic provides. And now it's not only t-shirts. Right, I used to just use the regular t-shirts just like this to go to the gym because, quite frankly, I liked how they fit when I was in the gym. But now they have an entire line of workout equipment. They've got hoodies, they've got jeans, they've got shorts. I can literally do just like about all of my shopping now at True Classic, and believe me, I got a lot of it. One of these days, I'll wear the shirt that Tina describes as my hot guy shirt because, again, they just fit right. And for those guys out there, too, that you're looking at maybe getting back into shape, or maybe you're someone that is already getting into shape at the gym or whatnot, I will tell you this, one of the most frustrating things I experienced going back into the gym was wearing workout equipment or t-shirts that didn't quite fit right. And you're working out all day and you just feel like, man, this shirt just doesn't fit. And then all of a sudden you get something like True Classic, which is a little bit tighter around the arms and shoulders, maybe provides a little bit more room in the belly that you are working on. And all of a sudden you feel a little bit more confident when you're at the gym. You feel more confident when you're walking around. Let's face it, guys, most of the t-shirts out there are not built to fit us the way they should, right? A lot of outfits out there to fit women the way they like to be fit. But guys, we don't have that until now. So go to trueclassic.com, go on there, use the link in my description. You're going to save a ton of money when you bundle. And like I said, they have a lot of great stuff. So bundle it all up, right? Get that. Look good for your lady. Look good for your lady. Because again, like I said, if she likes it on you, she'll probably like taking it off.
True classic.
No, it's there's an overwhelming problem within politics, and part of it is based off of the incentive structure, right? The incentive to do something and to be seen as doing something. And there's not a great deal of question sometimes on what that something is actually going to lead to with respect to, well, something we always heard in the Special Forces qualification course, right? Understand your operational environment. What are the second and third order effects of what you are doing? That was something that got hammered into us in SF training, but then you get into politics and it's all about, well, you have to respond right away or else we're going to be perceived as not doing enough or not doing something or whatever it is. And you're right. The bigger, the more expensive the demonstration, apparently the more you care. But then I look at how Trump handled Soleimani specifically. It was this idea of, we're not invading Iran. We're not bombing a bunch of airfields, even maybe legitimate military targets. They're going to cause some like 19-year-old technician to get killed. No, we're going to go after the guy that is perpetrating this, and we're going to demonstrate to Iranian leadership that attacking the United States now doesn't mean that we invade and set up a 20-year boondoggle. It means we go after the people directly responsible without hurting your civilians, and that is a much better approach.
No, that's right. And I mean, to your point in politics, my first campaign, got accused of stolen valor. I knew the guy that was behind it. I was ready to come off the top ropes and just crush this guy and blast back, because that's what we're conditioned to do now. You get punched, you come back with just a overwhelming response, because otherwise you're weak or don't care. You know what? My wife, my campaign team, and others said, rise above it. Your record has been out there for years. Mm-hmm. Don't give it oxygen, and show restraint. And they were right. Yeah. But it takes judgment to know when you've got to not just hit back, but hit back in the appropriate in the appropriate way.
Well, I had a similar issue happen in one of my races where this guy on Twitter just kept coming back and going, well, Nick claims to be a Green Beret, but I've never seen a picture of him in uniform, and I've never seen this. And I responded to him once. I'm like, you should tell my opponent to use that line of attack. You should really tell my opponent, like, if you really care about this, you should call up my opponent's campaign and tell him you got some real juicy intel for him that I'm lying about everything. Please, for the love of God, do that. I would really appreciate it. Well, what is another, I mean,
sure.
I know you're really busy. I know you got to go here in a little bit, but what's another hard truth that, in the book that you talk about that you think really translates to, again, kind of that unique style of Green Beret leadership?
Yeah, well, look, I talk about the book in the book in terms of loyalty. And that's not just a team effort, but when you're building these relationships with your partner force, that how much that matters. On the one hand, you always have to be looking over your shoulder. On the other hand, you build bonds that are very different than I think any other special operations force or any other conventional force. And I think that's why so many in our community in particular were so devastated by the disgraceful debacle of the Afghanistan withdrawal and how that was done. And I talk about one of my interpreters. We called him Spartacus because he was just such a little badass. The guy learned English by watching American movies. So, every other sentence was a string of cuss words that just didn't make sense. Right.
Yeah.
And listening to rap songs. But this kid was absolutely 100% willing to die for the values in our that are represented by our flag, and to the point he would have done anything and sacrificed anything for us. Unfortunately, he got a little bit complacent. The Taliban knew that these interpreters were a strategic asset. Without them, we couldn't communicate really with the public, with the populace, or even with our partner force. I always had one right in between me and that Afghan lieutenant. As we were, trying to go into combat, but also facing language barriers. They followed him as he got on a bus to go visit his parents, and ripped him off the bus, took him home, and beheaded him in front of his family to send a message. A 19-year-old kid, according to some of his cousins that came around to us later, he was singing "God Bless America."
Wow.
Right. And then I contrast that I was in uh, Afghanistan in 2009, and unfortunately had to lead the search for Bo Bergdahl, if you remember
Oh
that
yeah.
piece of crap
Yeah.
traitor. So here's an American soldier who decides he doesn't like America, decides he doesn't like what we're doing there. And rather than just finishing his tour and getting out, he betrays his country. He stacks his gear up on his cot. He sends emails to his dad, smearing his country, his unit, and everything that's going on there, and then defects to the Taliban.
Yeah.
He's tried to kind of wash this story of he was just disaffected and kind of wandered off his base and got lost. No, he defected to the Taliban and was actually giving them our tactics and techniques and procedures till he wasn't useful anymore. I had to lead the search for him. And we lost the conventional unit adjacent to us, lost soldiers
Hmm.
looking for this kid. And I'll never forget, um, turn on the TV one day and seeing his parents in the White House lawn next to Obama, seeing Susan Rice on the Sunday shows declaring him as a hero. Everybody take out your yellow ribbons. And actually, my first ever appearance on Fox News was with Brett Baer. I was the first to go on national television to say, time out, America.
Yeah.
This guy's not a hero. He's a traitor. He's betrayed his country. Here's what really happened. And we know the storm from all kinds of veterans speaking out that happened after that. And I'll never forget seeing him walk out of that courtroom a free man,
Hmm.
and wheeled in a wheelchair behind him was a sergeant that was shot in the head during the search for him, who could no longer speak. He was paralyzed, getting wheeled out, by his teenage daughter.
Yeah.
That was the ultimate betrayal in my mind, and I contrast those two. Just because you're necessarily born here or not born here, that notion of loyalty is a very powerful thing that can also be powerfully and devastatingly betrayed.
Yeah. Well, and again, to look at it from an SF perspective, when you're operating in small teams, 12, and ODA is 12 men strong. When you're operating these and you're operating very, very far away from any sort of logistical supply line, very far away from reinforcement, and you're embedding with, maybe it's the Northern Alliance, or maybe it was Kurds in the opening days of Iraq, you have to build a strong level of trust, because you're outnumbered 10-1 with the people that you're working with, right? Your whole goal is to be a force multiplier. And it's this question of being able to understand your mission, demonstrate how the mission that you have is beneficial to the people that you're trying to advise and train and take into combat, while at the same time ensuring that no matter what happens, you keep your word, right? You might have to tell somebody something they don't want to hear, but if you keep your word and they keep their word to you, it is amazing the sort of bonds that can be developed regardless of differences of, again, politics, differences of religion, differences of culture, just that simple thing of being able to keep your word. And it's amazing how more and more I feel like in our country, I'm constantly coming up against people that my biggest problem with them is not that we disagree on tax policy. My biggest problem is I can't trust you because the moment your argument doesn't work, the moment the kind of the illogical nature of what it is you're saying comes to light, you don't say, oh, maybe I should reevaluate, or maybe I should try a different tactic when it comes to argument. No, you immediately start name calling. Oh, well, you're just this, or you're just that, or you're just part of the patriarchy, or whatever it is. You throw out logic. And if you throw out logic and you throw out any sort of standard of objective reality, well, then now I know I cannot trust you. And if I can't trust you, there's no way I can work with you. And
Yeah, that's right. We can disagree on all kinds of things, fine, but we have to know that you're arguing in good faith, and that I can trust that I know where you stand,
Mhm.
and that you're going to do what you say you're going to do when you're campaigning for the job and that you're earning people's votes. That right, that the voter can trust you to be the person that they voted for. Look, another trait that I talk about is this idea of discipline,
Mhm.
and that may sound like kind of a shoulder shrug, but I think we're incredibly lacking as a society now, in the kind of the get up and make your bed and do what it takes to to be done, to be a positive contribution to our society. I tell the story, you'll appreciate this one, of Ranger School. And, starvation and sleep deprivation is the lens through which they operate. And when you are so sleep deprived, you're hallucinating, and your body is literally eating itself. I lost 31 pounds when I went through, hey, you're in charge. Can you lead to standard another 28 Rangers who are in the same terrible state? And in one of those missions, we had missed our resupply window. So we had been out of MREs for a couple of days. You only get one per day. But I had the discipline of keeping those little packs of Skittles.
Yeah.
You remember they're like the size of the Halloween,
Yeah.
like little travel size. There's like 12 in there. And man, about every kilometer, I mean, we had completely missed the helicopter. I think we were going to beat the crap out of the poor lieutenant who was in charge of getting us the resupply and got us lost. And about every kilometer, I would pop one of those Skittles in, and it was just like this explosion of energy and happiness
Oh.
for a few seconds. Well, some of my Ranger buddies saw me, and they were totally out of food, and they were giving me that like salivating stare
Yeah.
of like, "Aren't you going to share?" And I'll never forget thinking like, F you, buddy. I had the discipline to not eat everything and to keep a few little bits of candy to keep me going. You didn't have the discipline. Screw you, man. Well, fast forward as I'm getting evaluated, and peer evaluations are part of whether you make it to the next phase. And I'll never forget standing in front of the ranger instructor, the sergeant, and you see those pink cards where you got a bad peer eval, and sure enough, it was those two guys that I didn't share my Skittles with. And I'm trying to explain myself. I'm like, man, they ate all their chow, Sergeant. I had the discipline to save mine. And he looks at me. I'll never forget it. He said, on your psych eval, you say you're a Christian. I said, yes, sir. I believe in Jesus Christ, and I'm a proud Christian to walk the earth as he did with strength and humility. He said, huh? Big dip in his mouth. He said, what would Jesus have done if he had a little pack of Skittles? I was like, man. Yeah. I said, Sergeant, he would have given him his whole pack. You're right. He jumps up out of his chair. He's like, damn right I'm right. Sergeants are always right, Lieutenant. Don't tell me I'm right. He said, but look, when he calmed down and quit spitting his dip all over my face, he said, being disciplined as a leader, as an officer, means when you've got your stuff together, it's not just for you. Mm-hmm. It's for the good of your units, for the good of your Green Berets, or even for the good of the Afghans, Africans, or whomever that you may be training. And so, when you're in those situations, you've got to have a moral core, a moral compass, and the judgment to know when to not take the shot, or when to take the shot, or when to share when you've had your stuff together and they haven't. And so those are the kind of lessons that I think everybody can apply to business, to life, and certainly to politics.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to say this, though, as somebody that also went through Ranger School. I went through in, gosh, I think it was 2000. Anybody that gives you a bad peer because you wouldn't share your food in Ranger School is a douchebag. I'm just going to say that right now.
I thought the same thing.
I'm just going to say it right now. Yes, maybe it would have been the Christ-like thing to do to share in that situation, but I'll tell you what, it was not the Christ-like thing to do for them to demand that you give them your food in that city. Because I'm the same thing. I went into Ranger School. At that point, I am not the same weight that I was then, but I was 152 when I went into Ranger School, and I came out, I think, 128. So it was, I didn't have a lot of weight to lose, but man, I lost it. And I'll tell you the other thing too that struck me about Ranger School, because when I went through, I was a PFC, and
wow.
And I remember just being as intimidated as I could be by a lot of the NCOs, because most of the people that were going through as lower enlisted were from Ranger Battalion. I was coming from the 82nd at that point, but I remember one of the biggest takeaways I had was it was easy to be disciplined when you were in a graded leadership position. For those people that don't know, you take turns in Ranger School being in one of the various graded positions, and the rest of the time you're just one of the troops, right? And you would have the guys, and we all called them spotlights, right? You'd have the guys that as soon as they were in a graded position, it was like, all right, get up, do this, do that. They were super disciplined as soon as their grade was on the line. But when they weren't, they were the ones that would go to sleep. They were the ones that would sneak chow when they weren't supposed to. They were the ones that wouldn't be pay attention or would just be too tired to do anything. And one of the things that I always remembered was the great appreciation I had for guys that when they weren't on their graded patrol, they acted like they were because they wanted to make sure that everybody else made it as well. And that got reflected in the way we looked at people and the character of the individuals, because that was a big part of Ranger School. It wasn't just about people thinking about Ranger School as one of the premier small unit tactic courses in the world, and it is. I legitimately believe that. But one of the biggest things that you learn out of all that was the importance of character to leadership. You
nailed it. And it actually took me to be in the middle of it to figure out this isn't about small unit tactics. This is about knowing yourself, right? And this is about knowing where your breaking points are, and when you're told you're in charge. Yeah, you get that burst of energy because you've got to get your go. But the real test of character is when you're not in charge. Are you still going to pull? And nobody's looking? Are you still going to pull your weight? That's why the peer evaluations are so bad. But I'm with you. They kind of tried to screw me on that one.
Oh yeah, that was a garbage
like
peer.
Fast forward, I kept that in my first campaign. I'll never forget, and you'll appreciate this having been through one. We were so outspent so badly. I'll never forget getting a call from my consultant saying, "Hey, it's only a couple of weeks to go to election day, and Bloomberg just dropped a couple of million into your race in negative ads. Soros is putting money in. Pelosi's super PAC is putting money in." I had run for Ron DeSantis's congressional seat when he ran for governor, and they were determined to flip his seat, and just pouring money in. I couldn't keep up, so we just beat him on the ground. We knocked $250,000 doors and phone calls, 240,000 of just hammering. I had a team of young guys and gals out there just crushing it. I would pop a Skittle every good interaction at the door. And I'll never forget pulling up to the last house, literally sun's going down the night before election day. And I said, all right, I'm going to do one more. I literally had one more Skittle in the bag. And I walk up to this home, and there's a little shrine, an American flag, and it looked like a little tombstone. And as I'm looking at it, the woman comes to the door. And I asked her about it, and it was her son who was killed in the jump into Panama.
Oh wow!
PFC with the Ranger Regiment, and we started talking about him. And I said, "Ma'am, I'm Colonel Mike Waltz." She said, "Oh, I know who you are. I see the negative ads on you every day that the other side is putting out." And I said, "Well, let me tell you who I really am." And we talked, and she said, "Son, you're a little conservative for me, but I know if you have the discipline and the heart and the character to be a Ranger, to be a Green Beret, don't lose your soul up there in Washington, and stay true to it, and always keep my son's memory alive." And she told me, this is where I kind of got this phrase, be worthy, be worthy of his sacrifice. And I challenge every crowd I talk to, are we being worthy as citizens of those sacrifices? And so I think these stories will resonate, man. I mean, people need to hear this kind of stuff. I talk about resilience in one of the chapters, and you and I both know, I mean, Green Berets that and special operators that lost eyes, limbs, arms. I talk about Ken Dwyer. I don't know if you ever knew Ken, but he lost an eye, an arm, and a foot. Another one of my Green Berets lost his foot, and 9 months later was jumping in an airborne operation.
Wow.
And the system didn't know what to do with these guys because they're so used to, okay, here's your discharge, here's your disability payment, here's your this, here's your that. And you know what? And every veteran out there who's wounded or disabled deserves that. They didn't want any of it. They turned down millions and probably what would be a lifetime of payments so that they could get back to their teams. and get back into the fight. And what drives a person uh, to do that? And I think we need more of that in our society, more of that in our politics. Just more of that as Americans. And these are the kind of people we need to be holding up as heroes, not some Yahoo in Hollywood or in the NBA.
Well, and I think no, I think that point's incredibly well taken. There's a certain, and I think you see it especially in young men right now who are searching for something that I think when I was growing up was always pretty easy to find and grasp onto, and this was this inherent sense of honor. What did it mean to be a man? What did it mean to be an honorable person? And it was always tied into this concept of keeping your word, doing your job, overcoming difficult challenges, and believing in something bigger than yourself and wanting to fight for it. And I think people are starved for it, and they're starved for some sort of path or some sort of guidance on how do you distinguish between that which is honorable and worth sacrificing for and that which is superfluous or just hedonistic. And a lot of times I think these ideas, the reason why I think your book's important, the reason why I think it's going to have an impact is because there are so many people looking for that. They want to know, they sense it. Right? They sense that there is something greater, that there is something honorable out there that is worth fighting for and worth sacrificing for. And they're not quite sure on, okay, well, how do I discern that? How do I find out what it is? And then how do I prepare myself? How do I develop the sort of skills and capabilities necessary to be worthy of that moment? Because as you know, being brave or being courageous or being honorable in that moment when it is difficult to do so, it is not just something that happens. It is a series of choices that you make with respect to how you prepare yourself so that when the moment comes, when the opportunity arrives, you've done the things necessary in order to conduct yourself with both honor and effectiveness. And so I'm glad you wrote it. I think it needs to be, again, I've always thought that there was something unique about kind of the Special Forces and the Green Beret experience, the way the unit is organized, the way it operates. I used to always joke that and a Special Forces ODA should not work. You should not be able to put 12 A-type personalities together and have it be a wonderfully functioning unit, and yet somehow it's demonstrated itself capable of accomplishing things that nobody thought was possible. And there are reasons for that once you dig in and you start to understand how an ODA operates, the trust involved.
And the mindset, the way of thinking. It's the way of thinking.
The idea
but
of
I want to touch really quickly.
Yeah.
I think you hit such an important point with young men and with youth. And one of the things that I talk about here is getting us back to a nation that serves one another again. Government can't solve all our problems. Government shouldn't solve all our problems. Heck, I spend half my time in Washington keeping government out of your life and keeping dysfunctional agencies from trying to take too much and powering down resources to state and local that are closest to the people and that people can interact with. And things are different in Roanoke, Virginia than they are in Jacksonville, Florida, than Montana or downtown LA. But back to this point of our youth, look, I'm a proponent of national service. That is not necessarily a draft. That is, you don't have to be in uniform. You can do inner city tutoring. You can do national parks. You can do elderly care. There's a lot of FEMA volunteer corps. There's a lot of things that you can do. But the point is, you graduate and you go serve for a year or two and you learn those life skills of leadership, discipline, followership, teamwork, and you do it with other Americans who don't look or necessarily think like you. And, a light bulb kind of went off for me one time when a Korean War veteran came up to me after one of my talks and said, he grew up in the segregated South. He had never had a relationship really with a person of color. Lo and behold, 19 years old, first ship in the Navy, and his bunkmate is black. And that forcing function made them lifelong friends and helped them understand one another. And he told me, had he not had that, he doesn't know how he would have thought of minorities given the way he was raised. Well, we need to get back to that. I think having that kind of objective mindset in our youth. Again, not talking about mandatory, but when you talk about educational benefits,
Yeah.
when you have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren just erasing everybody's debt for free, giving away everything for free, well, I think the taxpayer deserves something in exchange.
Mm-hmm.
And oh, by the way, you get a better citizen out of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that would solve all of our problems, but I do think it would get back to that sense of purpose and higher calling, beyond your phone and sitting on the couch and playing video games.
Yeah.
And the more of that, the merrier, and the more veterans in politics at every level that have some skin in the game, the better.
Well, again, Congressman Waltz, I really appreciate you taking the time. Well, first of all, where can people find the book, and where can people follow you on social media?
Well, I mean, you follow me on X at Michael G. Waltz. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. You can get the book Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. And just by the way, none of the royalties are coming to me. They're going to go to the foundation for one of my Green Berets that I lost, the Matthew Pacino Foundation. We have to take care of our Gold Stars in a way, well, better than I think as a nation than what we're doing. And Nick, if I can just give you one more anecdote,
Yeah, please.
that I talk about in the book, if we have time, and that's on President Trump. I have a couple of stories in there on him, on the person, the leader, the commander in chief I've gotten to know from his creation of the Space Force that everybody made fun of. His Air Force secretary wasn't on board at the time, and he fired her by tweet. Not a nice move, but you know what? The generals were in my and others' offices on the Hill, ready to get back in line. They got the message. And look, now in retrospect, we see what Elon Musk and we see what SpaceX and what's happening up there and what the Russians and Chinese are doing up there, how right he was. But he's a disruptor.
Mm-hmm.
And how he goes about that in the swamp sometimes causes some collateral damage, but it's desperately needed. But back to the Gold Stars, I talk about the Abbey Gate Gold Star families, the 13 that we lost in the suicide bombing during the Afghan withdrawal. They couldn't even get a meeting with Biden. They couldn't, he wouldn't answer their calls or their questions. I called up President Trump and said, would you meet with them? He was up at Bedminster playing golf, of course. And he said, bring him up here, Michael. And so we did. We took him up. His scheduler kind of was like, hey, we can squeeze out maybe an hour. The president's got a lot on his plate. 30 minutes in, he looks at his scheduler and says, clear the rest of the night.
Mm-hmm.
He met with each one individually. He met with them as a group. He signed everything that they wanted him to sign, pictures of their loved ones. Then he brings them up for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And first time I saw DJ Trump, he pulls out his iPad and starts playing Phantom of the Opera and Pavarotti. And these moms who had suffered so much, Nick,
Yeah.
who were so bitter and so upset, they were laughing, they were crying. He had some of the couples dancing.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, man? A couple of them came up to me afterwards after he spent 6 hours with them, said this was the best thing that had happened to them
Mm-hmm.
since they had lost their son.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important thing he promised them was transparency. He said, I'm back in office. I'm going to give you all the tapes, all the drone footage, all the emails, anything you want. It's yours. You deserve that kind of closure. And I just tell you the story because, we see the rallies and we see the commercials, but, there's this other side of him that deeply cares about our veterans and about these families that, this is the ultimate trust as a parent to give your kids to this military organization led by a commander in chief. And I mean, it's the most precious thing you can give. To do the right thing, have the right policies, give them the right equipment. I mean, this is what gets me up every day to deal with this political BS, sitting on the Armed Services Committee, the Intel Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, because we have a sacred duty to give them the right policies, the right training, the right equipment as they go out there to keep us all safe.
No, and it's appreciated, and I'll tell you right now, it's not only appreciated as a veteran, it's appreciated as a father that whose son is going to MEPS this week, and we'll be shipping off here pretty soon. And I thought for a long time he was going to go in one direction in the military, and then earlier this year. He goes, nope, I want to go infantry. I want to go kind of a similar route that I did, but he's going to go the Ranger contract route. And who the commander in chief is will matter quite a bit. Because I've seen firsthand, and it's not just about Republican versus Democrat. It's about people that understand what it is to defend the country and what's the proper use of the United States military. Because I'm not I'm not an isolationist, but I also have been very, very frustrated with some of the interventions that we've taken. And one of the things that I appreciated most about Donald Trump, and one of the things, by the way, that I was very skeptical of when he first ran, was is this a man that understands the proper use of the United States military? That there are times, and we sign up for it. We're an all-volunteer force, and I support an all-volunteer force. But is this the sort of man that understands that you do not put men and women into harm's way frivolously?
He does.
And you take care of them after the fact. And no, he proved it. He proved it.
Yeah.
He proved.
But he understands the levers of power, right? You look at Iran. We don't need to invade Iran.
Yeah.
We don't bomb Iran. You choke off the money.
Yeah.
and who's buying all their oil? China.
Mm-hmm.
So you sanction their buyers. You tell them, if you don't stop buying Iranian oil, you can't buy us. You choke off the money that's fueling the terrorist groups that are shooting at our ships in the Red Sea right now. So he knows very instinctively kind of how to go to the root of the problem and take these other approaches. One more quick one that I think you'll appreciate. I know we keep saying that. I don't know if shut me up if we're out of time.
No, we're good.
I think you'll appreciate this as a Green Beret. I built a relationship over the course of a year with an Afghan elder. He had a tribal militia that was armed better than we were in the mountains of coast Afghanistan. It was actually over the pine nuts crop, which was a cash crop in that part of the country. When those tribes fought over the pine nut harvest, it was mortars and RPGs, and it wasn't pulling out a knife.
Yeah.
And I wanted them on our side, not on the Haqqani and the Taliban side. And my teeth were brown from drinking tea with this man. And he was an illiterate elder, but he was a boss. And he kept talking about this secret weapon that he has, with my secret weapons and what my tribe's doing, we'll defeat the extremists. This is how we defeat them. And I'm thinking, does this guy have a cache of stingers? Yeah. Does he have my intel guys hey sir, we got to see this thing. No, and I finally kind of called him to the carpet in one of our, drinking chai for hours and said, no more cash, no more training until I see this secret weapon. And I didn't know what to expect. And he's fine. He said, fine, Commander Mike, fine. I'll show it to you. Sends his lieutenant off. You know what he brought out? I heard all this rustling in the back. Out walks his two daughters, completely uncovered, hair long. And I was stunned. I'd never seen a woman outside of a burqa, right? And he was sneaking his daughters over to India to get trained as a doctor and to get educated as a lawyer. And he said, this is how we defeat them. When women rise up in Istanbul and in Tehran and in Kabul, the thing with Malala Yousafzai, the Nobel Peace Prize winning girl who was shot in the face by the Taliban for going to school, said the thing the extremists fear the most is a girl with a book. And they can't maintain their dictatorial rule forever over half their population. And you think about societies where girls are educated, women are empowered in business and politics, civil society. Extremism may exist, but it doesn't dominate. And so that type of thinking, I would take a couple of those elders over another division of troops any day, all day long. And if you think about it in kind of women's empowerment as a national security tool to undermine the Ayatollahs, they just had a national uprising in Iran because they killed a girl for not wearing a hijab, Masa Amini. But we didn't have the type of thinking to take advantage of that, to support that, to get those groups Starlink or encrypted apps so that they could communicate. And what these regimes fear the most isn't another stealth bomber
Yeah.
from us. It's their own people,
Yeah.
right? And we did that with the Soviet Union. Those dissidents were household names because we had that type of mindset from like the Casey's over the CIA at the time. And that's the kind of, when you talk about a Green Beret mindset applied, that's the type of unconventional warfare, the war of ideas, that I think we need to take, rather than another armor division that we're going to plop down there, the cost of trillions over decades.
Yeah, no, there's no question that again, one of the things I appreciated about Trump was this mindset of when you understand unconventional warfare, when you understand asymmetric warfare, when you understand kind of what is fueling a dictatorial regime or a terrorist organization, you look for unique and interesting ways in order to go about degrading it or eliminating it. And it's never as flashy, it's never as showy, but it usually costs a whole lot less money, a whole lot less lives, both American lives and civilian lives, and I think it tends to be a lot more effective long term, because ultimately, when we look at a country, like, we'll take Iran for example. When you look at a country like Iran and you see kind of the various populations, various groups within Iran that are done with the Ayatollah and want to see some sort of pathway, it makes a lot more sense to take whatever organic movement that aligns with American interests and find ways in order to support that than it does coming in, taking over the war, taking over the country, spending billions to rebuild. And then I got it. You might appreciate the story, or you might not. We'll see. In 2008, when I was, it was January of 2009, like December of 2008, January of 2009. First group was about to rotate out. 10th group was about to come back in for Special Operations Task Force North in Iraq.
Yep.
And my captain at the time goes, because I was the 18 Fox, I was the intel sergeant on the team, and he goes, "Hey Nick, you need to put more into the sit rep." And I said, "Well, sir, all we're doing at this point is packing up our gear and handed it over. None of our guys have met with any of our sources. We didn't do anything this week other than like pack up because they're going to be here in a couple days." Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Well, just put more into the sit rep." And I'm a bit of a smart ass, so I said, "Okay." I said, and we had a very good SOTF North commander, ended up becoming a 2-star general, I think, but. I said, "All right, I got a question for you smart guys up there at, SOTF North." I said, "Why are we the only country from a constitutional republic with a free market economic system that travels overseas, overthrows dictators, and then sets up parliamentary democracies with a centrally planned economy?" And now, keep in mind, it's not like I wrote this and hit send, right? I wrote it and then sent it over to my captain, who I thought was going to read it and be like, "Very funny, Nick, take that out." And I said, "Nope, that went straight up to Special Operations Task Force North." And the S3 calls down and goes, "Put Freitas on the phone. Hey, sir, what's going on?" And he goes, "Hey, I'm going to read this off to you." And I'm like, "Oh, all right, so that made it, huh? That made it." And he goes, "Do you think that was appropriate?" I said, "No, sir, like, here's what happened." I said, "But now that I have you, what is the answer?" And he kind of gave me the typical, "Stop being an ass, Nick." And, but it was, I mean, it's still, for me, it really remains this legitimate question. Why are we going about doing it this way when, especially as Green Berets? And this is another reason why I think Green Berets who had boots on the ground service, because I'll be honest right now, General Milley was a Green Beret. General Milley is the first Green Beret I have ever heard of that I couldn't find somebody within the community that would say something good about him. I've had other SF guys that were senior NCOs, that were officers, that were not well liked, but you could always find somebody that would say, no, hey, when he was a team sergeant, he was this, or actually he was a really good senior Bravo, or actually
can't find anybody.
Yeah, not one. I could not find one to say anything good about Milley. But the reason why I want more guys that, again, have the kind of boots on the ground experience is not even because we're all going to agree on everything 100% of the time. It's more of that mindset of looking for those kind of, force multiplier solutions, understanding that there's different ways to think about problems, that there's different ways to approach it, and that ultimately our job within the military
And
is,
it's not the default of the
yeah,
Pentagon to just throw more stuff and money and people
yeah.
at a problem. That's always the default solution.
Well, and you had your own exchange with General Milley at a committee. How exactly did that go down?
Well, you remember his, I want to understand my white rage and I want to understand my whiteness. That was actually in response to me uh, holding up a slide deck that a cadet's family had given me from West Point titled Understanding Your Whiteness and Your White Rage, which was a lecture being given at West Point by a woman who had tweeted the week before that the Republican Party was a party of white supremacy and that white people are outraged by black advancement. I mean, that is what is being indoctrinated and infected into the minds of our future military leaders. It's got to go. I can't
Well,
think of
let
anything
me,
more dangerous to unit morale and
yeah,
cohesion than you start, right? I mean, we all bleed green. We all wear the
yeah,
same uniform. The only skin color we worry about is camouflage. Just to foot stomp that, I had a knockdown drag out with the superintendent of the Air Force Academy who was doing pronoun training and said that colorblind was offensive. I said, look, I've called in close air support. None of my Green Berets ever asked what color or gender or religion the uh, the Air Force pilot was. We just wanted bombs on foreheads,
yeah,
and the enemy's bullets certainly don't care. So neither should
yeah.
we. We just need it's about standards and nothing else, and either you hit them or you don't.
Let me ask you a question, because this part I think boggles the mind of a lot of veterans. You would think. You would think at this point that our senior military leadership should actually probably be the best we've had in decades, simply by virtue of the fact that so many. If you were a lieutenant in the year 2000, you grew up your entire time from being a junior officer to a field grade officer to perhaps a general officer was spent in combat years.
Yeah.
Right. So what in the hell is going on where our senior leadership that should have grown up their entire military service almost exclusively at war, having to actually fight an enemy through unconventional warfare and conventional warfare and counterinsurgency and foreign internal defense.
Mm-hmm.
How is it that our senior military leadership, the ones that we allowed to pin on 2 stars and 3 stars and 4 stars, are more concerned about pronouns and gender ideology and queer theory than they are about actually preparing young men and women to have to go into combat situations? How did that happen?
It is them doing this, blowing with the political winds, and under both. But if you look at it, the people around Obama and Biden, I mean, they have been in those positions 12 out of the last 16 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have been pushing this agenda. His service secretaries are pushing this agenda, and general officers who know better are just kind of turning an eye and letting it happen. And we're seeing it at that level, but also at the junior officer level, because 80% of our officers come out of ROTC departments,
Yeah.
out of where they're getting this nonsense in our higher education. It's really, if you look at the whistleblowers, the people who push back, it's kind of our generation, right?
Yeah.
That haven't been indoctrinated in how bad our schools have gotten, but aren't worried about Senate confirmation for our 3rd star or 4th star, right?
Yeah.
And so, but it's got to go. We're going to carve it out. I banned CRT in the last defense bill with a strong definition of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But the progressives, if you look at the long march through the institutions, it was the media, it was entertainment, it was sports industry, and it was, of course, academia. But the ultimate prize were corporate boards through ESG and the military through CRT. And we have a long road, a long fight ahead of us. We have to fight that fight. One of the chapters here is truth to power.
Yeah.
And that is speaking that truth to power, despite all the blowback that you're going to get.
Well, again, and having somebody in Congress that actually understands what the long march through the institutions is, what Antonio Gramsci was trying to achieve, what a lot of other people have been trying to push through those institutions is incredibly refreshing. Because again, I serve an elected office at the state level, and it is amazing to me how many of my colleagues have no idea what any of that is, or how it has actually impacted the culturally shaping institutions that are so critical
That's
to
right.
a nation. And that's another area where, again, I think the Green Beret style of leadership is unique, is because as you expressed earlier on, where we were kind of explaining the differences between Green Berets and the rest of the special operations community or the rest of the military in general, most military units are designed around this concept of having a particular set of skills and executing those skills very, very effectively with other Americans. Green Berets are unique in the sense that we were the first, I shouldn't say the first unit in American history, but the first unit that was specifically designed through this idea of the combat force multiplier. We of course do our lineage through the OSS and World War II, and you could even draw certain aspects of it beyond that. But it was this idea of working by, through, and with indigenous populations in order to achieve American objectives, which coincided with their objectives. And that concept, one of the biggest things, again, understand your operational environment. I don't think there's any other unit in the military that goes through as much emphasis on understanding the culture that you are interacting with in order to determine the best way to influence and the best way to operate. Well, I think it's time that we wake up to the fact that there's a lot of people with very, very, let's say, ideologies which are antithetical to what we would call the American experiment. This idea of individual liberty, personal responsibility, free markets, property rights, the idea of a government with an important role to play, but with powers that are enumerated and limited.
Right.
And not supposed to be, ever expanding. There are a lot of people in positions of power right now that disagree with that, fundamentally disagree with that vision of society, disagree with that vision of America. And if you look at the culturally shaping institutions, whether it's the media, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's higher ed, whether it's just public education, they have done a very good job of infiltrating those. But to your point, the ones that were kind of left over was this idea of the business world, because the business world generally operates in a way that, hey, profit or loss is competitive. It's cooperative, but it's also competitive. And you got to get results or you fail unless you can run to the government for support. And then the military is very much rooted in this idea of you got to get the job done, because guess what? The guy shooting at you doesn't care what you identify as that day. They're going to shoot you anyways. You see it within the sporting world as well. You either got the touchdown or you didn't. Not everybody gets a Super Bowl trophy. And now you look at those three remaining institutions, and the corporate world is pretty much gone at this point through, like you said, ESG, through finance and BlackRock and whatnot. But the military, they are now making significant inroads into the military, the church, and into the sporting environment. And if we really lose those, we've essentially lost every culturally shaping institution within the country. And you can't expect to win elections, and you can't expect to save something where you have entire generations now that have been brought up to believe it's wrong and it's evil and it needs to be completely just replaced with this other ideology.
You have such a nuanced and deep understanding of the issue, but we as conservatives got to stop complaining about it, and start taking those institutions back. I'm not convinced it can be done, nor should it, out of Washington D.C. I think it's done at the state and local level. And if you look in the case of Florida, right, where we have half the state budget of New York, despite being a larger population, where we're making real inroads in terms of universal school choice, putting power back in the hands of the parents, money back in the hands of individuals, where meritocracy still reigns, and where you're seeing, you look at Miami, the amount of money that is fleeing leftist governments in Brazil and Colombia and Venezuela. Miami is poised to be the Dubai of the Western Hemisphere. And the Space Coast, where we have such innovation in STEM, I don't mean to make this an advertisement for the state, but my point is at the local level, governors and mayors and county councils and school boards that were flipping back to conservatives, people are coming to the tune of 1,000 people a day because they want these results.
Well, no. I think, again, I think all those points are really well taken. It's amazing how I will see the left measure they will measure a state by how big the state budget is. I like states that measure the success of their state by how big the budgets are of their citizens. So, listen. Yeah, well, listen, Congressman Waltz, once again, thank you not only for your military service, but thank you for your continued service here, and thank you for the book. Because again, I'm always looking for more things to be able to, point people in the direction of to take a look at those hard truths. And I think it's really important that we finally have a book that really focuses in on the unique nature of the Green Beret style of leadership, because I think more people are going to see how relevant it is to their life, not just from a military perspective, but really just a day-to-day perspective. So I know we did this once, but one more real quick. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Yeah, look, find me on X, Michael G. Waltz, Facebook, Twitter. Again, it's WALTZ. Emphasize on the T.
Yeah.
Right. I actually have carried a weapon of war in a war.
Yeah.
I don't need to lie about my rank. I'm a proud retired colonel. But it's hard truths. Think and lead like a Green Beret. Again, the royalties are going to veterans charities. And I hope people find some meaning in some of our experiences that are unique to Green Berets downrange and how we're applying it to this insane political environment we find ourselves in today.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you very much for watching. Please go check out that book. Again, Hard Truths, How to Think and Lead Like a Green Beret. Go and follow Congressman Waltz on all of his social media pages. It's important that we come alongside people that we know will keep their word, that they believe in a sense of honor, they believe in a sense of objective truth, and try to conduct themselves accordingly. That's the sort of people that we want to see not only in leadership, but hopefully when we have a Trump victory on November 5th, we're going to start to see more people rise into positions of leadership, both within the legislature and within the executive branch, that understand things like the long march through the institutions and what needs to happen in government. But I really want to emphasize what Congressman Waltz said earlier, because I think this is important. We can't wait around for politicians to fix all this for us, right? This is about us taking ownership of the institutions that are near and dear to our hearts and competing for them. I hope everyone will do that. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.